It's fair to say garage sales are my kind of environment. I've been enjoying all sorts and forms of that kind of events for absolutely ages. Although now, in 2020, it appears slightly more difficult to find a proper one which hasn't got cancelled due to the whole pandemics. But I was lucky and came across this little gem recently. While I'm not any expert on remote-controlled cars, when I saw the box, I knew its content could be potentially interesting. As it turns out, the now previous owner acquired this set around 8 years ago, started fiddling around with it and then dropped it as life came into way, a situation I'm sure many of us can relate to. After a couple of years of deferring the project, the man couldn't figure out how to put it back together. And here comes me. Being genuinely fascinated with it, I've decided to buy it for cheap and bring it back to life as it deserves. Although some information about this model can be found online, it appears to be either rare or simply unpopular at the time. Made in mid-80s by the Japanese toy manufacturer Bandai, this hobby-grade RC car featured full shaft-driven 4-wheel drive as well as front and rear bevel gear differential. I imagine it must have been a really cool thing to have back in 1986 when it was released, which by the way makes a fun perspective to have as the car is definitely older than me. Many separated parts could be found inside, the car itself half assembled. After a quick browse through the box, it appeared promisingly complete despite the components being all over the place. Upon quick stock taking, some partially finished body parts could be observed, along the front steering and suspension module, shock absorbers, original battery package with some nostalgic graphics, a radio unit, wheels, the main body and the rear module with engine, suspension and differential, oh and of course the driver figure. Amongst other parts, I found a driveshaft and an antenna, all very useful as one can imagine. Another interesting feature was, at least back then, its unusual suspension setup with longitudinally mounted shock absorbers on front and back. As far as I understand, this model helped introducing such design to the wider market, using many later models and occasionally borrowed by other manufacturers. I think it's always interesting to own a piece of history. Let's see if I can bring it back to life. I started with looking at the radio unit to see if it's still operational and whether the in-car receiver is communicating. Here I discovered the first problem, the old battery spilled. Upon closer inspection it didn't seem too bad and I decided some cleaning is required first. The electronics inside the transmitter seemed surprisingly well, the contents of alkaline batteries not affecting the old-school PCB at all. I loosened up the most polluted battery terminal and started cleaning it with a bit of vinegar and old toothbrush. The old rust was easy to remove as well as all the corrosion caused by the batteries. Then the terminals were checked if they are clean enough to still conduct electricity. By pure accident, one of the wires was snapped during cleaning and now I had to solder it back. The connection appeared weak anyway due to the amount of corrosion accumulated around it, so refreshing the connection won't make any harm to it. It seemed okay after that, so I gave it a set of new batteries. The transmitter went on and appeared to be functional and it could be put back together for now. I also noticed there was a bit of the antenna missing, which made it impossible to connect it to the transmitter. I'm going to add that piece later on by just threading a piece of 3mm steel rod in between. Now let's have a look at the car itself. The main battery pack was missing, which is not a big deal as it could not be expected to work after that many years. Even though the manual which came with it was in German, it's easy to work out all the parameters and voltages required. The wires connecting to the battery pack seemed to be cut at some point in the past, which could mean this car was an object to at least few experimentations. Luckily, no more traces of spilled batteries could be observed, yet the car was not turning on, even with fresh power. Opening the main body revealed at least one potential cause. Main power switch should be coupled with an LED, but its limiting resistor was detached from the circuit. One of its legs snapped. I found a replacement and quickly soldered it in its exact place, not analyzing the whole circuit at this point, and you shall see later on why this could matter. A matching 7.2 volts battery pack was not at my disposal at that time, so I used my bench power supply to simulate it for some quick tests. If it all goes well, I'm going to build a battery pack in the next part of this video. The car was still stubbornly unresponsive, so I started looking for more problems. The reason for that was quickly to be found. Now I'm not sure whether it was me clumsily snapping it off upon opening the enclosure, or it's been like that before. All I knew was that one of the wires caused the circuit to remain open, and it was the one leading from the receiver power supply. In order to find out where exactly it was coming from, the main receiver PCB had to be removed. The receiver circuit board was surprisingly clean, again having some old school vibes compared to modern PCBs. I found the battery terminal was all corroded, no wonder the wire snapped off so easily. I cleaned it up a bit and attempted at soldering the wire back, paying attention to where it was connected on the other end. Now, after putting it back together, the LED went on, which indicated fixing the wire was indeed the remedy. But something was still not quite right. I mentioned I paid a lot of attention to solder the wires back to its original place, yet it seemed impossible now to turn the car off. Or at least the LED itself, it stayed on regardless of the power switch. Someone, either me or the previous owner, messed up. This means all the connections around that area will need to be reviewed. I then gave the motor a quick test by applying 7.2 volts directly to it, and as it appeared working, it was really good news. For now, the goal is to confirm the radio communications are working and the car can be operated. Another strange problem was that the power button appeared to be inverted, meaning the receiver module was on with the button in its off position and vice versa. I've got a feeling the former owner was really struggling to put it back in order. I will definitely look into it and likely end up resoldering the whole power switch area just to avoid any serious damage to the circuit. For now, I'm just quickly testing the radio module, and seeing the wheels and the steering servo spin made me happy. It means the car is working in principle, and to continue working on it now makes a lot of sense. Overall, it's safe to say I've been lucky buying it despite its unknown state. The next steps would be to figure out the power switch problems and building a proper battery pack for the motor. Stay tuned and do subscribe my channel if you haven't already, as I hope working on the Interceptor will make an interesting and until recently unexpected series.